Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filippovitz. Matt, what's going on?
Bill, I went to Ryan Field this weekend to bake in the late September Chicago sun. I got to watch the first turnover of the year for Penn State. I got to watch the band honor Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I got to watch Penn State fans grumble about like a 4-score win. So it was probably one of the better Saturdays I've had in a long time. So I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, Ryan Field seems like an interesting place because the only other Big Ten team I've been on the road to see is Indiana. Their stadium does how it looks remind me a little bit of Indiana, where it has that it's a horseshoe thing. There are no tiers. It just goes straight vertically up in all direct. It looks like a souped up high school.
It felt like those kind of vibes. First of all, easy walk from the train, phenomenal train experience. Shout out to the Purple Line, really
Good.
Easy to get to. But I'm not sure it has bathrooms. I'm sure it does. I'm not confident it has bathrooms because the only bathrooms I saw was just lines of porta-johns that you could access once you scanned your ticket. There weren't like a ton out in the parking lots for tailgating, so I was a bit thrown off by that. But yeah, it's definitely it gave off like high school football energy vibes, which is actually kind of nice. Like I got to hear a lot of like the players yelling on the field, which was pretty cool from my vantage point. But overall, I get why they want to build something new.
So, all right, so for the people listening, did you hear any player or coach specifically say anything that is going to stick with you for some reason? Was there anything especially funny? Was there an interaction where you saw the body language was funny? Anything like that that stuck out from being at the game? And
there was one thing
ground?
The way the Penn State section was, it was behind the Northwestern bench, and I couldn't pick out which player it was. But after Penn State went 3 and out in the first half again, because they had a ton of those, I got to hear one Northwestern player just really shout that, quote, "they ain't shit," which was pretty funny. In that moment, it was pretty funny. But outside of that, it was nothing that crazy. It was just pads popping and people calling out calls. It was nothing that I thought was interesting to take away.
Yeah, you didn't you didn't hear whatever led to Cam Miller gently tossing a football at someone and getting a 15-yard penalty.
No, and I couldn't see that he threw the ball. So when the penalty got called,
yeah.
Also by nature of where my seats were, you couldn't see the replay board because it was blocked by scaffolding from some renovations, I'm assuming. So I never saw what happened. So I didn't know he threw the ball until later that night when somebody mentioned it to me. I had no idea that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very weird football game involving the Nittany Lions and Northwestern Wildcats, and Penn State was able to pick up a 41-13 win. Penn State covered the spread, which, thanks to some people, was apparent. Some people thinking that Bo Prabula was trying to take a knee was on. Whatever was apparently a controversial
Look, Bill,
thing.
I don't often
go
into victory formation, but when I do, I always make sure 5 guys go out for routes.
Yeah, his foot very obviously just if you watch it again, I think it was his right foot was his trailing foot there. It very obviously just slips, and he ends up going down a little bit farther than you might think. It's not like it was the Kenny Pickett fake slide against Wake or whatever the hell it was. But regardless, Penn State was able to pick up the win on the day. I don't necessarily. I think from the perspective of how Penn State's defense performed, Matt, 13 points is definitely fair, and maybe Northwestern is a little lucky to have gotten that. Did you feel like Penn State scoring 41 points was a reflection of how dominant they were?
No, honestly, I wouldn't. And I'm trying to go back and forth on how I want to handle this podcast, and I've been rattling my brain about it for the last hour before we said we were going to jump on. And there's one perspective here where Penn State went out there and they did not look like the best version of Penn State or like the version of Penn State, Bill, I don't think either of us want to see in Week 5. Is that fair to say?
I would say that's not only would I say that's fair, I'd say that going into the bye week, there legitimately are alarm bells going off about Penn State, about how Penn State's offense is their process and how they are able to do things separate from their defense. And we'll get
For
into
sure.
this
So
over
there's the
course
Penn State angle to look at, but everything is relative. So there's also the lens of other contenders in college football are like having clunky games as well and not winning them all by 3 scores. So there's just two ways that I'm trying to look at this through, and I think like the way I'm going to handle it for this pod is that just look at it through the Penn State perspective. Like, ignore the fact that Florida State struggled and only beat BC by 2. Ignore the fact that Washington struggled and only won by a touchdown against Arizona. Ignore the fact that Georgia struggled and only won by a touchdown against Auburn. I have to get those out of my brain and just look at it at, although it was a 41-point performance, Penn State was not good enough for what we think they can be in that football game. The Singleton fumble, I'll be honest, watching it happen right in front of me, I could see it happening a mile away. Like, when he fielded that kick, I'm like, this is going to end so poorly. You could just tell. That was the only squib kick that Northwestern kicker did all game, and it kind of just froze everybody. And I think Singleton made a poor decision to pick it up, and then that spots him 3 points right there. So, it just really felt like the team was out of rhythm. It was a sleepy, hot 11 a.m. kick on the North Shore of Chicago. And it just really looked like the team was not ready to go out there and win a Big Ten football game.
Yeah, it was interesting because James Franklin very clearly prepared this entire week for the players needing to get up and bring their own juice for this game. Considering 11 a.m. kick, considering it was Northwestern, considering all these things. And I thought Penn State's defense, they get put on they're on their heels early on in the game because of Singleton dropping the opening kickoff. Northwestern had, and this is I think a thing that we mentioned on the preview pod, Matt. Northwestern had that one drive for a touchdown, 10 plays, 59 yards, 5 minutes and 16 seconds, where they were able to just make a few things happen. Every team like Northwestern that wants to play a little bit faster is prone to having a drive like that. We saw it in the Illinois game. We saw it, think back to last year. I think Indiana had a drive like that against Penn State.
And I think Ben Bryant's going to be one of like the top 5 quarterbacks they play this year. So like I'm fine giving up just really one touchdown drive against what I think is going to end up being. Hopefully he's healthy and hopefully whatever you went out with is nothing serious. But I think he's an actual ball player.
It is at this point where I now mention that Northwestern is 116th nationally in offensive SP+. But I think that like I said, the defense did everything it had to do. And we'll get to the offense in a second, but I want to start by talking about the defense because I think this is going to be a much quicker conversation. And they deserve to have us start with them. We normally start offense then defense. The defense deserves to be the unit that gets talked about first here because they were exceptional in this game. Northwestern had 19 first downs. They were 5 for 16 on third down, 0 for 2 on both of their fourth down attempts, 175 total yards, 1.4 yards per rush, 4.2 yards per pass. They only forced that one. I don't even want to say they forced a turnover because the ball was thrown more directly to Daquan Hardy than it was the receiver.
That's the easiest pick a Penn
but
State
they were able to
player
get the
is
one
ever going to
turnover.
have.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not one to swear on Blog's Twitter account, but I dropped an F-bomb on that one because I was like, what in God's name was he doing there? But I think that when we think about, Matt, what we wanted to see out of Penn State going into this game, we wanted to see one thing out of the offense. We wanted to see one thing out of the defense. We got the defense's best punch here. The defense was able to throw its best punch here. And heading into the bye off of a performance like this, you're going to have to assume they're going to spend the next 2 weeks walking around with their chest puffed out, thinking, rightly so, that they're some of the baddest men in college football.
They're doing the opposite of what they did last year in the sense that they are overwhelming passers with a dominant defensive line. Like, they got to 40 sacks last year, but a lot of that was Johnny Dixon. A lot of that was Curtis Jacobs. A lot of that was Abdul Carter. I have it pulled up in front of me. It's 7 sacks, Bill. I think the only one that involved a and non-defensive linemen was the Keon Wiley one, and I think Kobe King may have gotten one in there too. But the defensive line is just hitting their stride at the perfect time. Amin Vanover and Keziah Izzard are really like the third and fourth guys in their respective position groups, and they're out there making plays in limited action. Denai Dennis Sutton had a big game. Adisa Isaac had a nice sack. You know, the pass rush is just really finding where I want them to be. And the back seven is just always going to play phenomenal football. Kalen King got a couple thrown his way. You know, it worked out pretty well. I saw Kalen King even got to blitz on a third down. They're keeping him engaged. It just feels like this is the perfect version of the Manny Diaz defense. And, Bill, I'm starting to think we're not going to see a unit play better than this in, like, maybe the whole Franklin era. This is just an insane stretch this unit's on.
Yeah, it's I was talking with a friend of mine who's a Michigan fan, where he said that, you know, the relative weakness of Penn State's team are its Penn State's defense are its defensive tackles, and everywhere else in his eyes, it's NFL caliber guys. It's safety at corner, at linebacker, off the edge. And I said that to say this, like, I thought, above everybody else on Penn State's defense, the most impressive player was probably Zane Durant at defensive tackle, and just like the havoc that he was able to
seeing him in person, Bill, like as close as I was able to. I cannot believe how thick that dude is, like in the legs. That dude looks huge. His lower half looks ginormous. You can tell he's all explosive off the line, and he made plays happen at, I think, his most dominant rate on Saturday. He looked outstanding.
Yeah, he led Penn State's defense, or Penn State's defensive tackle group, in snaps with 32. Next was a tie between Devon Ellies and Nakeem Beeman with 24. And truly, Matt, is there anything that we can say about Penn State's defense that hasn't been said before? I mean, I think the thing that maybe made this game a little bit different was the fact that they had to go out, they had to find that juice, find that energy, find that spark right from the get-go, with Nick Singleton making a mistake, and then the offense having, you know, really taking a bit to start to get into a rhythm. After the field goal, 6 plays and a punt, 11 plays and a field goal, 6 plays and a punt, 3 and out, 6 plays for a touchdown. Like, it's not like they were out there. It's not like they were out there consistently going up against a not great offense, but one that was in disadvantageous positions all game. They just went out there and said, no, we're going to put our stamp on this football game. And as a result, like, I just don't know what else there is to say about Penn
one
State's
final thing
defense
on top of like their dominance, just with I think pure athleticism. They were really well prepared for this game. That Zion Tracy tackle on that fake punt was awesome. That was really well scouted, and everybody saw it coming.
Yeah.
So I love that it's both preparedness as well as just this God-given talent and athleticism. I think that is the perfect place for this defense to exist in. And Bill, you said it best. I can only say this defense is outstanding so many times, and I generally enjoy watching them, like maybe more than I enjoy watching the offense sometimes.
Well, that's not a maybe. Yeah, it's the speed of this unit. It's the talent all over the place. Like, the first, I think it was on the first or the second drive of the game for Northwestern. I can't remember which one it was. Or no, it was the second drive of the game, first play of that drive. Northwestern gets a field goal. Penn State comes out 6 plays. Riley Thompson has to punt it. Right out of the gate, Matt, on that first drive, Kobe King just gets his way right into the backfield and blows up Ben Bryant for what I think was the first sack of the game that Penn State ended up having. And I think that's the thing that impresses me the most about this defense, and it's something that we saw here, is that, like, we could sit here and expect that Chop Robinson, Denai Dennis Sutton, Adisa Isaac, Abdul Carter, Kalen King are going to flash, but it feels like every single game, and this game was this game certainly fits into that. There are different guys than we might expect going out there making the kind of splash plays that they stick out in our minds, they stick out on the highlight tape, and they make you feel more confident that Penn State's going to have an answer for anything and everything.
It's all
as the
depth,
season
baby.
goes
It's
on.
all about building depth, and they're finding ways. Real quick, one last point. I know I just said one last point. Bill, go back and watch Jordan Vandenberg try to find somebody to block on the Daquan Hardy pick. He clearly has no idea what he's supposed to be looking for, and it's just really funny.
Why would anyone have any idea what they were supposed to be looking for after they saw the pass that Brendan Sullivan?
Fair point. It's a very fair point.
Yeah, good. Like you just looking through the box score. 32 carries, 45 yards. Obviously, sacks are put into that. Their top ball carrier was their backup quarterback who ran it 7 times for 25 yards, 4.2 yards per attempt through the air. Like it's, God Almighty. Is there a player, Matt? In the we'll do game balls obviously in a second, but among maybe the more obvious players. Was there anyone in particular who you thought had just a really
Durant's
good
the
football
obvious
game?
choice there, but I'm going to give a hat tip to Tyler Elsdon.
Yeah.
He had a good play on that. I think it's fourth and short where they tried to do that QB sneak everyone's doing nowadays where you just push the guy. Elsdon jumped on top and I think met the ball carrier in the air, and that was a good play. Another wheel route, man coverage, Elsdon gets out there, and, I want to see him get his head around, but it wasn't called. It wasn't really PI either, but he went out there and he made a couple of nice plays, and that's great to see. Guys can get better. Guys can improve, and I think that's a philosophy we really have to start taking into consideration on the offensive side of the ball. But it's really good to see, even in this defense, which, if you're not performing, it's easy to see a quick hook for you. It's good to see guys still get a chance to go out there and prove that they can add a lot of value to this defense. So a little bit of a hat tip to Tyler Elsdon there.
Yeah, and that's where the way that they've built up the depth on that side of the football over the first 5 games of the season is like really beneficial, right? Like we know that Kobe King is probably Penn State's best option at Mike linebacker, but Tyler Elsdon is still getting out there, getting on the field plenty. We know that they probably like Jalen Reed as their number one safety, but they have other options there that they could put on the field. Cam Miller has ended up getting a ton of time as a result of the depth that they've been able to build up. You look at defensive end, Zariah Fisher leads the team in sacks, or he's tied for the team lead in sacks with Adisa Isaac. Amin Vanover just explodes off of the line of scrimmage. Like it's all these little things, and in a game like this specifically against a team like Northwestern that was able to throw a few punches early on, Matt, that's why I don't like. It's not a coincidence that Northwestern had 3 points in the second half. It just didn't look like they had anything. Penn State's 1s are rested. Penn State's 2s and 3s are getting experience. As games go on, it's something we talked about earlier in the season with how it's going to be very hard to come from behind on Penn State. We're seeing that from the defense and how they are able to just continuously throw haymaker after haymaker after haymaker.
No points allowed in the third quarter yet this year. That's a hell of a stat. Hope that goes on as long as possible.
Yeah. For sure. And speaking of things that we hope go on as long as possible, I think it's time to talk about the podcast sponsors,
Nice
which is
transition.
Home
That's
Field
well done.
Apparel. I'm a professional. Home Field Apparel. Matt, did you wear
I
any
did.
Home Field apparel to the game
I
this
didn't
weekend?
wear white to the road game. I know you were supposed to. I didn't. But I rocked my Script Nittany Lions t-shirt. And I saw some Home Field on the train, actually, on the way up. My train. I took the red line up to the end of the red line, essentially, at Howard. And then I jumped off at Howard, and then I took Howard to Central on the purple line. And my entire red line train at one point was just Penn Staters who were getting up there to go transfer. So that was pretty cool. And a lot of Home Field apparel in that crowd, too.
Yeah, I was rocking my 1986 National Championships t-shirt. But the thing with Home Field Apparel, very good shirt. They have lots of very good shirts. They have lots of very good hoodies. They have lots of very good joggers. They have lots of very good crew necks. They have basically anything that you could want if you are a college sports fan for your school or for another school that might potentially interest you. I know that I've purchased Ohio State attire for my girlfriend. I have sent over West Virginia attire to my brother-in-law and told him to spend money without telling my sister he was dipping into their shared account so he can buy himself something. Home Field Apparel, it's the kind of company worth spending some money on, even if it will get you in trouble with your significant other. Penn State, they actually just added a couple new things to their Penn State collection, a brand new collegiate seal ringer t-shirt with a brand new 1994 Rose Bowl.
That's beautiful. That hoodie looks
and
nice.
crew neck. They are awesome. The crew neck in particular is one that once that next direct deposit hits, I'm going to be spending some money on it. If you would like to spend a little bit of money on Home Field Apparel, please use our promo code RLR23 for 10 or 15%, Matt. 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer. Again, RLR23 for 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer. Thank you, as always, to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this podcast. And Matt, let's move to the less stellar.
This is the weirdest thing to talk about.
Which is the performance. Well, I think it's weird if you just look at the fact that they scored 41 points without a little bit of context. And I even mean stuff like, they had 353 yards of total offense, 30 of them, which went down as their second longest passing play of the game, was the one play that the backup quarterback played. So Penn State's first team offense, or offense with the first team quarterback out there, had 323 yards of total offense and 34 points, while also getting really advantageous field position with some frequency. And I think that if you just and I know this in part because we have friends, Matt, who have said, so I watched the game, 41 points, pretty good. It was a really disjointed effort, I thought, by Penn State.
The reason I think this is so weird to talk about is Penn State is the top scoring offense in the Big Ten. Bill, I don't think either you, me, or anybody listening to this podcast had that on their bingo board. Is that fair to say? And the next closest team, let me make sure I have this right. Yeah, that's correct. The next closest team is then Maryland, who has played Towson, Charlotte, maybe the worst Power 5 team in Virginia, Michigan State, and Indiana. None of those teams are going to be hanging their hat on their pass defense or their defense as a whole anytime soon. So I'm saying all this to say Penn State's offense clearly looks off, but the way this offense looks off is that it looks off in a way a 2004 Penn State offense probably looked on. The thing that they do well are these methodical, long 4 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards, 12 yards, 3 yards, those kind of drives. And we're all conditioned, I think, really since Franklin got here to think that big plays, explosive plays, that's what's going to win you these big games. And they're just not here right now. I don't know where they are. I'm sure they're in there somewhere. You look back, you watch the tape, you see, it's one missed assignment here. It's an overthrow here. It's a drop here. It just feels like this offense is not clicking in a way we're comfortable with. And I don't know if some of that's by design or if it's just the horses just aren't ready to run the way we hope they could run yet.
Give me a sec. I had this pulled up in my stupid finger. Clicked on something wrong. But I think a very fun thing to note with points per game is that number 1 in the Big Ten is Penn State. Number 2 is Maryland. Number 3 is Ohio State. Number 4 is Michigan. A very fun thing about that is that Penn State, Maryland, and Michigan have played the 3 softest schedules in the Big Ten in terms of the college ESPN's PI strength of schedule. Maryland has played the easiest schedule among all Big Ten teams, and then Michigan, and then Penn State. So it's very funny now that I go back and look at it, how that correlation has happened. And then Ohio State, obviously, their offense just has not been quite at their absolute sparkling best, but they're buoyed by the fact that they kicked the hell out of Western Kentucky. So funny thing to note there. But yeah, I think that when we look at Penn State's offense, I think a really telling stat you mentioned big plays, Matt, and I think the reason that we're so conditioned to do that is because we know for a fact James Franklin and Mike Yurcich are actively seeking those out. James Franklin has been seeking those out since the day he got to Happy Valley in 2014. Mike Yurcich since he was hired as Penn State's offensive coordinator. And the thing that I found really interesting, I went and looked at yards per play over the last during this college football season. Penn State is tied for 83rd nationally in yards per play with Mississippi State, Jacksonville State, Minnesota, South Alabama, South Carolina, and Wyoming. Since Big Ten play started for Penn State, so over its last 3 games, and obviously, not everyone's played conference games. Some teams have played non-conference games against a better team, whatever. Penn State's over the last 3 games, Penn State's at 4.6 yards per play, which is tied for 110th nationally with Charlotte, Army, Cal, Akron, Arizona State, Ohio University, UTEP, and San Jose State. And I bring that up in reference to the game that we just saw Penn State play, because that just tracks with what we saw in this game. Drew Aller was at 5.7 yards per attempt. Seemed a little too eager to take his checkdowns.
He's got to throw a pick.
There. Penn State's top receiver.
We have to rip the Band-Aid off.
Penn
He's got to
State's,
throw one.
Yeah. Penn State's top receiver on the day in terms of receptions was Nicholas Singleton, who had caught 6 balls for 39 yards, 6.5 yards per reception. And then on the topic of Singleton, you then go to the running game. Penn State ran the ball 39 times for 134 yards, which is 3.4 yards per carry, which is obviously like a little bit wonky because like 6 of those plays were Aller trying to barrel himself forward. But Singleton at 3.8 yards per carry, Aller at 5.7 yards per attempt. You look at Aller's yards per attempt numbers basically since the West Virginia game. And did this game, Matt, in your opinion, feel different from Illinois and Iowa in how Penn State's offense struggled? Or do you think it's just kind of been one common through line over the course of the season over the course of the last couple of games so far?
How do I want to word this? I think it's twofold. I think it's the running backs were so good so early, and I think that you're always trying to improve. And I think the biggest thing that Singleton especially could have improved at was being patient and waiting for holes to develop. I think that is in his head a little bit and taking away some of those, I'm just going to find grass and use my instincts and get to the open field. There was one run, I think his longest run of the day was like 15 yards, where it looked like 2022 Nick Singleton. And then on the passing game front, I think it's Drew Aller wants to be efficient. That's a word he keeps using. And the receivers aren't allowing him to do that because they're either running the wrong route, they're dropping passes, or they're not gaining separation. For all the guys not named Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was awesome on Saturday, I thought. They really missed Trey Wallace.
He had a good game.
They really need Amari Evans, who, real quick, I do want to say, there was one curl route to Amari that was tipped at the line of scrimmage. Amari had like 2 yards of separation already. I think that would have been an explosive play. I think Amari would have made a guy miss in space. So there's that element of it all where just passes are getting tipped. It just feels like that passing attack cannot get on the right page. And thankfully they have really 20 days at time of recording before Ohio State to figure it out. But again, 5 games in, they haven't yet. So like now I'm really starting to get nervous that those big plays we saw against West Virginia may have been a flash in the pan and not something sustainable.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that the caveat, Matt, of since West Virginia, because the West Virginia one, the positive side of it is that's increasingly looking like a really good win for Penn State. But in that game, Drew Aller, 21 for 29, 325 yards, 11.2 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns. If he plays like that all season long, he is a Heisman contender. But since the West Virginia game, 81 for 129, 62.7%, 767 yards, 5.9 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. And one thing that I've been tracking over the course of the entire season is his numbers compared to Sean Clifford's numbers last year. And Clifford threw 2 more interceptions. Clifford ran for 2 more touchdowns. Clifford's yards per attempt were a little bit higher, but they are eerily similar. And I think that we're seeing with Aller, and this game was a really good example of that. I don't know if it's a mental block. I don't know if it's just a desire to not make mistakes or whatever it is, but he's not taking those deep shots. He actually did take one deep shot. It was a pretty well thrown ball to Dante Cephas where he drops it right in the breadbasket for Cephas, and then Cephas gets a foot in, the ground just dislodged it. And I almost wish that was like his third throw of the game, Matt, because then I would understand. Yeah, then I would have understood why he hasn't taken more of those deep shots. Cephas, just kind of on that note, like Aller obviously trusts him, but Cephas needs to start rewarding that faith in him. That he had 2 receptions on 7 targets on the day. And there was that drop. There were a couple of miscommunications.
The 4th down catch was a nice play. I'll give him credit there. The 4th down catch was
the fourth down catch, yeah. Especially because like that wasn't Aller's bet. You go back and look and like he just put it a little too low and he just went down and made it. But that was a good play by him. But Penn State's receivers, it's kind of it's the fear that I think we had coming into this season, Matt, where Penn State's receivers just need to be a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. And I think compounding that and what we saw in this game is that Drew Aller has, thank God the bye week is this week and it's a chance for him to work on some things, because I didn't think he had a very good football.
Again, I do wonder what the script would have looked like had Singleton not fumbled that opening kickoff. Nobody ever wants to play from behind, especially on the road in a weird environment. Like I understand theoretically what they could have been going for, but that point you made, Bill, about you want that deep shot to be, throw 3 of the game. I couldn't agree more. I think we need to have the lid get taken off, and I think that's going to open up everything else, especially for the running game. So Aller definitely did not look the sharpest he's ever looked, but again, he's taking care of the football. He makes some throws that you're just like, yep, that there's that guy. He's definitely still in there, but that's why I say he has to throw that first interception. He has to. I think you said it best in our Slack today, Bill. He has to see that he can throw a pick and it won't kill him. Like, this is a complete Penn State team. If he throws a pick, I guarantee the defense can go out there and they feel confident they can force the offense to commit 4 turnovers any given Saturday. So it has to be this two-way street. So I hope we start to see Aller take some shots. I don't know if we're really going to see a lot against UMass, but in Columbus, he's going to have to be ready to hit some deep shots if they want a shot to win. So I hope that the next 20 days are just a lot of focus on that.
Yeah, and like here's a stat that I think you are going to hate, and I know all of our listeners are really going to hate, but like on the road this season, Trey Potts has as many road passing touchdowns as Drew Aller does. Drew Aller has not thrown for more than 208 yards since the West Virginia game. And this game, one thing that I think we were all looking forward to, Matt, was the opportunity for him to come out and let loose a little bit, be willing to take a few more risks, that kind of thing. And they just didn't do that. And I think it's very telling that the ways to explain it away are a lot of, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, and not this is just what this kid is right now. He has chances to potentially build off of that. Again, I think the bye week is coming at a really great time for him in terms of guys getting healthy, all that, but like he needs to see that Penn State can't be the team that we think it can be unless he is playing at the level that we think he is capable of, because we've seen signs of it. And I think, Matt, him doing that would really help Penn State's running game, which didn't have an especially good game on Saturday. Trey Potts had that really nice touchdown run. Nick Singleton, I think you can see how frustrated he is, and it's coming from a place of expecting more out of himself. And Kaytron Allen obviously got hurt. So, just generally, what do you think was up with Penn State's running game on Saturday? How concerned are you about their performance? And do you think they're another one of those groups that's going to really benefit from having this bye week coming up?
So first things first, on the injury front, 2 things. I did see Kaytron Allen at the alma mater after the game. He was like holding it looked like his stomach kind of vibes. I don't know what the injury diagnosis is yet. I don't think we will. I think fair to say he will not play against UMass, but whatever it was, he was well enough to go out there and sing the alma mater. JB Nelson, I have no idea. He was carted off to like very little fanfare because he was carted off from the sideline. It's not like he was like in the game when it happened. So it was a hot day. Like, I don't know if just dehydration hit him, like unexpectedly hot, but those are two big cogs in the Penn State running game. And Bill, sorry, what did you say the biggest reason you thought the unit struggled was?
I'm not even 100% certain.
Okay, so you're not sure either. I couldn't remember if you gave a reason why you thought so.
My honest to God guess is that Singleton and Allen are just not doing a good enough job at making guys miss.
I think it's Brenton Strange is gone. That's a huge part. Yeah. The tight ends are not blocking up to that standard. The offensive line has been fine, but it's clear that they're a pass block focused unit, and the running backs just aren't hitting their hole. Trey Potts looks like a guy who has hit adversity, overcome it, and is running like a guy who knows he's going to have a bad run or two, and he's not afraid to let that happen, and that's what I think is letting him be so successful. I think Singleton and Allen have to, especially Singleton, have to work their way through those inner demons and just say, I'm going to lose 3 yards here. Maybe the big play's not here. Maybe I shouldn't be so patient here. Like, again, it's all things that are going to come, but I really am surprised that, both those guys aren't hitting the ground like we thought they would.
Yeah, and if you actually go back and look on Potts' touchdown run, they pull both Norzad and Wormley, and Norzad gets right through that hole, blocks a linebacker, and Potts has to make one guy miss, and he makes that one guy miss, and he's able to scamper right into the end zone. And it's just felt to me like Allen and Singleton, when they're in a phone booth like that, aren't able to just do that one thing to get by someone, which is surprising because they were like exceptional at that last year. Like, I think Penn State's offensive line has been fine, not great. I think the stuff with the tight ends and how having a tight end is going to just inherently bring an extra guy into the box is certainly valid. But this was a game against a really bad it's similar to the passing defense, Matt. This was a game against a really bad running defense to be able to go out and impose yourself a little bit, and they just never felt like they did that.
No, and I'm not saying it's Villanova 2021 vibes, but kind of feels like that. And I'm more nervous today.
The thing with the Villanova 2021 game was that the offensive line couldn't do anything.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think the offensive line looks more like, obviously they haven't been a 10 out of 10.
No.
They've been a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. Instead, by my estimation, the concern with me is more on the running backs, and I think the fact that the quarterback hasn't been able to punish teams for quarterback and the wide receivers haven't been able to punish teams for really going keying in on this running game.
I do wonder if it's like, do you think they're holding anything back?
No.
It's game 5.
I think it's ridiculous.
It's game 5.
I'll be honest. I think it was 10-10 against Northwestern.
It's game 5.
Yeah. I think that is a line that fans frequently use to try and justify why their team was struggling. But if Penn State was holding something back when they were in a dogfight against Illinois, if Penn State was holding something back when it was really gross and obviously not clicking against Northwestern, then that's a problem. Like, that is not a good thing. They should not be holding things back if this mantra of 1-0 is something that the coaching staff actually believes in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Again, it's game 5. Like, the season's almost halfway over. You are what your record says you are at this point. You are what you are at this point. So I do think I think they have to take shots against UMass. I think they can afford to. I think they have to throw at least one deep ball a drive. I think you have to do it. And then see what happens from there. But after UMass, Bill, are you and I going to be on this podcast saying, oh, I feel like it's fixed now? We're going to say, no, it's UMass.
No.
So, we've hit this point in the season where it's the impossible dilemma we're in, where that we want it to be fixed, but it can't be fixed until the biggest game of the year.
Yeah, and I tweeted something along these lines at halftime of the game yesterday, which was basically that, like, there are all these things that I think are true on Aller, but the second half yesterday was a huge one for him, and by extension, a huge one for Penn State's offense, because it was the last time they'd be going up against a Power 5 defense before they walk into this little shop of horrors 2 miles away from my apartment. And they were either going to look like a team, look like an offense that is capable of moving the ball consistently, winning down the field, doing the sorts of things that great offenses have to do, and we're going to have our concerns quelled a little bit. Or they weren't going to do that, and we were going to be recording this on Sunday at 8:57 p.m., Matt, going, ooh, I don't know how great I feel right now. Is there anything about the offense right now, particularly that we saw during the Northwestern game, that you feel good about?
Again, 41 points in a game they were stuck in third gear in is pretty impressive in and of itself. Does kicking count here? Can I give Felk a shout out here and
Sure,
Riley
if you want
Thompson
to.
for getting that snap down? That was a high snap that the senior transfer duo really handled pretty well.
Yeah.
Tyler Warren with a good catch. He's the first overall pick. People forget. It's just cool to see Trey Potts.
Warren's. I want to say something real. The Warren thing is weird to me because he seems like a guy they should be relying on more frequently. Like, he seems like a guy who's just really good at using his size when he's in specific places and he has, like, a sure set of hands. It's a little bit weird to me they're not, like, making it a point to target him.
I disagree with you on that point, Bill, just because I think he was such a big part of the Iowa game plan, like 2 tutties in the whiteout. And then I think it was very clearly, just with how much they rotated, it was very clearly a wide receiver-focused game plan last week, I think, is where I'm going to fall on that. So I see your point, and, like, listen, I'm absolutely the kind of guy who wants Tyler Warren to be more involved, but I think that it's gonna law of averages itself back out, I think.
Let's see if I can find his. I can't find his. Unfortunately, can't find his targets number on the air. But he is a guy who I would like to see Aller throw to a little more. I will say this. I think that with each passing week, I become a little less concerned about Keandre Lambert-Smith's ability to be the guy.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it at all anymore.
Yeah,
that dude can play.
He could play. He's electric when the ball gets in his hands. He already has the second most receptions that he's ever had in a season for Penn State. He's already tied for second for the most receptions touchdown receptions he's ever had in a season for Penn State. Like, he's a guy that I want to see them find ways to get him the football more. And one thing that really sticks out to me is sometimes he is just able to catch the ball and then get another 20 yards after it. And I think that, his big reception, his 35-yarder against Northwestern was a really good example of that. And I think that's something that Aller could really use. I think getting the ball to his athletes in space, whether that is Lambert-Smith, whether that is Singleton, even whether that's a guy like Dante Cephas, is something that would be really beneficial for him, because I almost feel like if he's not going to be generating big plays by just taking deep shots, you need to start getting those big plays by getting your athletes the ball, letting them be athletes, and maybe using that as a way to build your quarterback's confidence up a little bit.
And I hope the return of Trey Wallace adds another guy to that mix.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know. The offense definitely has me concerned. I don't love what I saw, but again, they're performing at a level that I think is they're passing every test so far. Are they acing every test so far? No. But there's been a lot of years where they did not even pass every test.
Yeah. And I think now's a good time. Let's hand out some game balls.
Yeah.
Offense game ball, defense game ball. Who are you giving them to, Matt?
So offensive game ball, I'm going to steer your thunder a bit here, Bill. Keandre Lambert-Smith. The guy's electric. I love that he is this security blanket. I think he is going to just continue to get better as the year goes on. So offense for me, it's Keandre Lambert-Smith.
I'm I think I'm actually going to give mine to Nick Singleton just because
Nice.
I like the way that he keeps fighting. I think that once he hits a big one, that's going to be huge for him. I think so much of it right now with him is just confidence and frustration, these sorts of things. But even in the face of that, 119 yards of total offense and a pair of touchdowns on a day when Penn State needed someone to be able to find their way into the end zone. It's maybe a little bit participation trophy-y, but I'm going to give mine to Nick Singleton. Who you got on defense?
So I'm going to give it to a second-year defensive lineman, and that's Denai Dennis Sutton. Not the flashiest day in the stat sheet. 3 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. Comparatively to what we see these big defensive ends have sometimes. But being at that game, I felt like Denai Dennis Sutton was making plays in the backfield all of the time. So number 33 gets it for me this week.
Yeah, and I have to give it to Zane Durant.
Got to.
4 tackles, 3 for loss, 1 sack. Just the exact kind of game that we've wanted to see out of someone along at the defensive tackle spot for Penn State. And, his explosiveness. Matt, I know coming into the season you were a big Hakeem Beamon guy, and he certainly hasn't been, terrible or anything. But the game that we saw Zane Durant have is the game that we've been hoping to see Hakeem Beamon have with some level of consistency. So
I think Zane's the breakout star, I think, of Big Ten play so far.
He's up there. Against Northwestern, 4 tackles and a sack. Didn't have anything against Iowa. He had 1 tackle against Illinois, but just an electric football player. And Penn State, for how good it is elsewhere on its defense, being able to have a guy it can rely on to make plays from the defensive tackle spot is huge. We're about to enter the bye week. We're going to any fun plans for this weekend, Matt? With no Penn State football?
No, Jen's running. My girlfriend is running the Chicago Marathon on Sunday. So Saturday is going to be just laying low, staying off our feet. I say mine like I'm doing anything. Just going to be having a nice weekend. I'm looking forward to it.
Being moral support in these kind of things is really important.
True, it is.
Yeah. So just going to be a lot of sitting around, watching a lot of football, watching what's going on elsewhere in the sport. There's a part of me that there's a little voice in my head that wants me to head up to see the local team take on Maryland at noon. I'm probably not going to end up doing that, but there's a little part of me that wants to do that.
It'll be fun. Have you been to the shoe before?
You know that G-Fed guy on TikTok who walks onto fields, and I did that with Ohio State once. Of course, this was a decade ago before I knew when G-Fed was probably 10 years old, but neither here nor there.
This might not be fun for you, Bill. I don't know. It might be cool to check out a historic stadium with no real stake in the game.
I've gone back and forth on this, and ultimately, I just don't know if I want to expose myself to Ohio State fans any farther.
That's fair.
But we've kind of touched on this, Matt, through this episode of the podcast, and we will have a big we'll spend more time talking about this stuff either at the end of this week or the start of next week. But coming into this season, you said you predicted 11-1. For Penn State. I predicted 10-2. I don't remember. Did you predict them to beat Michigan or Ohio State?
I cowered it out, and I did not give a prediction there because I have no idea.
Okay, so you said one or the other. Oh, that's fine. Mm-hmm. I obviously predicted they would lose both of them. As we sit here through 5 weeks, and we're talking about a 5-0 Penn State team that does seem to have some flaws about it, are you more, less, or as confident in your 11-1 prediction?
More
confident. Okay.
2 reasons.
Why?
The Ohio State offensive line and law of averages on the Michigan front. I will bet against any person to not go 24-0 in the regular season in the Big Ten in a 2-year stretch. I will bet against anybody. And I just think Penn State's the best shot to win that Michigan game, and I think watching the Penn State defensive line find its rhythm, I think can rattle a Ryan Day, who I'm assuming spent his bye week throwing darts at Lou Holtz's picture.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, it's taken everything in me not to make fun of everyone I know. over that. But neither here nor there. Like I'm equally confident as I was, leaning a little bit more towards more confident in them going 10-2, just because of the issues that we have seen on offense. And I think Penn State's defense is box office. I think they have been exceptional. There's the little voice in my head that goes, hey, West Virginia, Delaware, Illinois, Iowa, and Northwestern. But I've seen plenty of teams, mess around and find out and not play up to their standard against opponents of that competition, of that level. And Penn State has managed to do that. So I'm not going to knock them for that. I think the defense has been lights out and should continue to be very good as the year goes along. Penn State's offense has not lived up to my expectations. And Penn State's offense has been so dependent on Penn State's defense that it concerns me a bit what happens if the defense isn't able to bail them out. And what I mean by that is that Penn State has scored 12 touchdowns in Big Ten play this year. 6 of those, 2 against Illinois, 2 against Iowa, 2 against Northwestern, came off of turnovers, with one of those turnovers obviously being the recovered punt that bounced off of an Iowa player. So that was more of a special teams thing. But the Penn State's field position in those situations, one was on Penn State's 43, the other 3, opposing teams 30, opposing teams 39, opposing teams 19, opposing teams 34, opposing teams 30. And my concern is that what happens when those drives end in punts, and not when those drives end in a big play by the defense that gets them the ball in a position where they should be able to turn it into points no matter what. And I completely agree. I don't think Ohio State's offensive tackles are any good. I think their defense is excellent. And I think that obviously they have skill position talent. And Michigan, I just think I think they are probably the best team in the country. So it's really hard for me to get to a point where I will predict that Penn State will beat either of those teams. So I still feel good about saying 10-2, Matt.
And we just fundamentally disagree on that. And that's fine. We've gone back and forth all offseason. Those are all really great points. I understand that the offense isn't what we want it to be yet, but it is what it is. And I've always said this is the window year. If they're going to do it, I can't imagine they'll do it with a team that isn't as talented as this. So, if you were to tell me right now, would they beat Michigan? I'm probably going to say no. Would they beat Ohio State? I'd probably say no. But if you give me that sweet spot that says, will they beat one of those two? I will say yes. That doesn't make any sense now that I say it out loud, but in my brain it kind of does. In a vacuum, Penn State should never lose to Ohio State. Ohio State outspends them like crazy. They recruit better. They have a much more engaged fan base. That is the pillar of football in Ohio. And that's fine. Penn State has the Steelers and the Eagles in the state, blah, 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 whatever. Michigan is the perfect version of what Michigan wants to be. They should never lose as this version, but inevitably somebody will beat them. And I just feel like Penn State is the kind of team with that defense, with what I still believe the talent on the offense could produce. I just think they have a really good shot to beat one of the two.
Yeah, I think, God, I just had this up somewhere. Give me 1 second. Going into the both of those games, if you're just trying to go on a neutral field, Las Vegas thinks Ohio State is 3.5 points better than Penn State on a neutral field. Michigan is 5.5 points better than Penn State on a neutral field. If you go to SP Plus, Michigan is 6.8 points better than Penn State in a neutral field, and Ohio State would be 6.3. So it's an uphill climb. It's something that they're going to have to it's something they're really going to have to figure out. And fortunately, that's what part of the benefit of having the bye week right here, Matt. Anything else you want to say before we send the people on to the start of their week?
No, that's all I got. If you went to the game, hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed the city. And I'm excited to have a nice, relaxing week here. We might pop in here for a midweek pod, Bill, but no promises. I don't know how we're going to handle this yet. But as always, thank you for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. Make sure you're going and subscribing wherever you go and get your podcasts. If you use Apple Podcasts, please go and leave us a 5-star review. If you use Spotify, please. There's this new Q&A feature that we've been using as a way to get questions in from all of you guys. We'd love to keep using that, especially with this week being a week where we need stuff to talk about. Please give us stuff to potentially talk about here in the podcast. Make sure you're following us on Twitter over at RLR Blog. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube. Head into the YouTube comment section, talk about Penn State football a little bit. And of course, thank you again to Home Field Apparel. Remember the promo code RLR23 for 15% off of your first order if you're a new customer. One last time, thank you very much for listening. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Go State.